Hello. Welcome to Times Lit Festival 2021. And in an amazing times where we are from offline, now we are online. And that's another amazing part because now we are attending it across the world. Uh, that's just personally, I think it's just amazing. Of course, there are a lot of sad things as well. But today we are here to discuss one amazing thing, which is spice. Personally, I do believe that a life without spice and food without spice is really bland, and hence we need both the things. Uh, as I was mentioning earlier to Manjari as well, that I think spices are the root, essence of the body of anything. So your own body is root as well as food. And today I'm joined by Manjari and Shylashri. I am Saddaf, and chef and author, and I do research on food history, folklore, mythology of food, etc., etc. So basically, anything and everything about food, that's what I do, and also podcast. Um, we have Shylashri and we have Manjari. One is from policy space. Shylashri has written books. She's an author. Then we have Manjari, who's a nutritionist, who also deals with food in a very different space. She's also an author. So we have a power-packed discussion. That is what we will be now going towards. Now, um, up 2020 and 21, or largely, if I can say, COVID times, has pushed us towards look at spices in a very different way. Of course, if I can go back, if I can take the liberty, if I can go back to Nani Dadi's time, we always had our Nani Dadis or mothers saying, the usage of spices in different ways, that सारी जो मेडिकल थेरेपीज होती है वो किचन में होती है. तो अगर आपका पेट खराब है तो खाना नहीं खाया होगा, या फिर अगर आपका पेट खराब है तो ज्यादा खाना खा लिया होगा. So that's also a thing. Then you have all the spices that's in the kitchen, right? So from turmeric, that अगर wound हो गया है तो you can sprinkle some turmeric on top of it and then it will stop. From just drinking lemon or drinking salt, sugar, different kinds of just spice by itself or different blends, how it treats us. And it is a sort of a wisdom since forever. It's not a new wisdom, but of course, COVID times in a way brought that back. The chalan or the prakriya of drinking kara came back, which is like a concoction of multiple kinds of spices. Um, so now spices are not just an ingredient for me. It also has functional food, as I would like to put it. And way before trending, it's been with us. So where I want to sort of start discussion on spices would be that few of our spices, and we start with Manjari first, on the usage of spices. Why do we have different kinds of spices? Because when we talk about Indian food, we don't have only one spice doing its magic. We have blend of spices. So why is that? Why do we have such different blends? Why can't we just do with only one spice, let's say zira or
Yeah.
salt?
Yeah. Hi, Sadaf. Thank you for the question. Blend of spices, because you don't want just to be happy all the time. Yes, you want to be ecstatic. You want to be excited. You want to feel a sense of, little adrenaline. So the spices, essentially, what they do is they bring in many properties to the food that we eat. As you said, they are now called functional foods, which means foods that can change the metabolic pathways in the body, which means they can maneuver around the human biochemistry and affect the way we experience or treat disease. And that's the superpower, and that's why they will become superfoods. They already have been, started being termed as superfoods. To give you a very simple example that not many people know about is something called chelation. Spices have an amazing property of chelating heavy metals from our body. With the modern world that we live in, we're exposed to a lot of toxins: aluminum, silver, cadmium, lead, mercury. A lot of things which are heavy metals get into our system and are extremely toxic. They're carcinogenic, neurotoxic. And spices can actually bind with them and remove them from our body. And there's enough research to show that. And that is called chelation. That is the power of binding with toxins. And different spices bind with different toxins. For example, mercury can be removed very effectively by something as simple as dhania. So cilantro can bind with mercury, and so can so many more spices do the same thing. So one of the reasons we use an amalgamation of spices is because their functional capacity is different in terms of human health. Some of them are antiviral, some are anti-allergic, some are carminative, some are great for neurological health, some are good chelators, some are also great for as diuretics to cleanse the kidney. So they perform different functional aspects in the body, and therefore a combination has been used, culturally, because it also, if you look at our own naturopathy, Ayurveda, there is an understanding and explanation of how spices can be used in the medicinal space, in the integrative health space. So therefore, I think, and of course, taste is another aspect to it. The flavor, the taste, the palatability of food becomes many, many times better when you use those concoctions of spices.
Yeah. Because what you mentioned, right? There are within the spice world, or if I can say spice box, right? Because not all of us, but a few of us, almost all of us, will have a spice box. Now, spice box has a combination. So there are these thande masale, and then there are these hot masalas, right? But is there in because you have talked about Ayurveda, and then we will come back to Ayurveda again. But is there a sort of what does Ayurveda say that what is this blend? Should we have hot masalas, or should we have the sort of thanda masala? Hot masala I would throw in, for example, nutmeg and all that comes into sort of hot masalas, right? So what would the medicinal side would say?
So Ayurveda works on a concept of, the Vat, Pitta, Kapha, which is essentially dividing the human body into the type of body it is. And therefore, different spices fit with different body types. If you're a person who has more Pitta, which is more phlegm, then you use the hotter spices more. As you correctly said, nutmeg, star anise, these are hot spices which seem to have a hot sort of essentially what happens is we have Ayurveda believes in the concept of the digestive fire, that there is a digestive fire in our gut, and that is really where everything is happening. And therefore different spices can influence it in different people according to their pravati in a different way. And so it's quite a complex thing really in Ayurveda. Therefore, there are tables and tables of how different people with different symptoms should be using spices. But in modern medicine, there are some clear-cut, laid out uses of spices that are now being adapted into mainstream, contemporary, modern allopathic medicine, as we know for example, treating a cancer patient with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, we're also incorporating microgreens, we're also incorporating spices, we're also incorporating herbals and botanicals as a part of the treatment. So in Ayurveda, the concept is essentially the body type and what spice really goes with it. But in modern medicine, we know that, there are pathways of the body that can be changed or modulated with spices, with a certain potency of them. So that's how they're being used in present days.
Brilliant. I will come back to that again. Now I'll go to Shylashri, because you mentioned about the modern medicines and how they're using the masala or the spices, right? I am somebody who also likes history. And I think whatever age I have devoted, I just have devoted that age in knowing things. So we'll take a step back to Shylashri. Shylashri, you've also written Turmeric Nation for people who are seeing. So now, of course, you have talked about turmeric and how the nation, India, is sort of turmeric binds them all together from irrespective of, I would say, class, region, religion, caste, whatever it is, right? Turmeric binds them. But let's take a step back and try and understand spices from a historical perspective, and of course, including turmeric.
Okay. Well, actually, I just want to get back to this the notion, the previous question, because I think one of the things with with the way in which modern medicine, and you may disagree with me, but in the way in which modern medicine treats the human body, it's actually different from the way Ayurveda and the Unani system treated the human body. So you have this notion of balance in the both Ayurveda and the Unani system, where they used all spices in order to create that balance for a particular type of person. And people and individuals were grouped into either 3 or 5 different, depending on which system you were looking at. But in the modern system, every part seems to be seen on its own. And as you have more and more specialization, this notion of balance seems to have gotten lost. And so I think one of the things that's happening now with this pandemic is people are moving back to the older system and sort of bringing some of those tropes back into the current system. So that it doesn't become so disjointed that, you just completely dismiss the older systems. And that's what was happening, I think, with modern medicine. And modern medicine actually came into vogue and actually became acceptable only in the 19th century. So it's not that long ago. And until then, and in India, it's still not really accepted by a whole bunch of people, because, if people, even now, like if you break a bone, you would much rather go to somebody who does either Ayurveda or does the herbal medicine, rather than coming to an allopathic doctor who put it in a cast. And the cast is not always very effective for a lot of people who think the herbal, getting the leaves and putting them or getting oils and massaging it, that seems much more effective. So I think in India we have our entire, the way in which we cook our food, the way in which we think about herbs and spices has always remained wedded to the older system, not to this system. So even this notion of superfood is actually just a modern term for bringing some of the older things back, which we always had. And as you were saying, we all have our little boxes of spices, and we have all of these different spices, and we use these different spices to create a balance in the way in which we cook our foods. And in case people are interested, people have done studies on how the way in which in India we use this notion of negative pairing of spices, which means that each spice performs a unique function in that particular recipe. Unlike, say, in the US or even in Europe, you would find different spices performing the same function to enhance a taste. So, you would have, in India, you wouldn't necessarily have a tamarind and lemon going together and amchur going together in the same recipe. Yes, there may be recipes like chaat, you have all of these, but generally speaking, the recipes don't have that. And so I think we have that notion that each spice has a unique function, and the unique function has a connection with the medicinal property of that spice. And historically, if you go back to looking at how people sort of related to these spices, what you find is that when food was cooked, and like even if suppose chefs cooked food for the kings or princes, it was always like a doctor chef. That's what they were actually called. They were actually doctors and chefs all combined together in one person. And so the medicinal property of herbs and spices has always been really important in the way we've cooked our food, and it continues even today. And so with the pandemic, I think it's just become much more sort of significant to people, because now everybody wants an immune system that is a system that would sort of, everybody wants their own bodies to somehow not get COVID. And so they want themselves to become immune. And so they rush towards turmeric and a whole bunch of other, and pepper water and all kinds of things to sort of get that. But I'm not sure. Here, I think, the medical profession would probably be better suited to answer this. I'm not sure whether our bodies, if we just start taking all of these superfoods, I'm not sure that that necessarily helps us in the way it could have helped as compared to taking it as part of your food over a longer period of time. So that's something that might be interesting to sort of look into. But yeah, that's.
Yeah. I think if I think it's a very common folklore about the Delhi or the North food. When you mentioned about, right, the doctor and the chef, the Khansama and the Hakim, they would work together and not in silo, unlike now, where chefs are chefs and doctors are doctors, and they don't necessarily come together. And then the good old story about how Delhi Sultanate, not Delhi Sultanate, but Delhi, as in when the Mughals came in, when Shah Jahan was sort of establishing Purani Delhi, and how the water wasn't great. And that's how when the Hakims came, and Hakim said, okay, you need to eat spicy food to cut down the sort of the issues that the water will give you, the Yamuna. That times Yamuna was really not suited for drinking. So the spice, but if you're having too much spice, your gut will then not work. So then to cool down, you need some fat. And so the beauty is that even then as well, what you're mentioning, right, the new modern age is a very newer science or newer medicine versus the good old method that people used to do, which I would argue also that it has also stood test of time, because nowadays what we're having to boost, and of course, I think all these good old method is a lifestyle, if I can add. It's not a quick fix that people think that, Acha, I will have this and then I can become this Superman suddenly. I will have some superfood, I will have some jowar bajra or some turmeric in life on like 5 days, and then I will be Superman on the sixth day. Now, versus like a whole lifestyle. So that brings me to back to Manjari, because on talking about the kadha that we were drinking, the whole of COVID, we were sort of gulping down kadha after kadha 3 times or 4 times as well. I have had 4 times, so that's something, 4 times of kadha. So, and that is something which, because I think the medicines we were taking or we're still taking, like a mix of, and I'm talking about COVID only, it's a mix of the modern science, the modern medicine, as well as the kadha, right? And not just kadha, but I think when second wave hit, there was, well, maybe rumors or maybe not. I'm not too sure. I can't put my finger on that. But the usage of kapoor to open up your, expand your lungs, right? Or hing, ajwain, or even onion dipped with salt to expand your lungs so that you can breathe more. So that kind of gave like a nice amalgamation of modern as well as the old tradition, which Shylashri was mentioning. So where do we, I mean, is it good to continue that? Is there a science in both the things? Modern science, we're calling it science as well. Often because what Shylashri again mentioned about Unani and Ayurveda, right? So nowadays, often a lot more younger people, they run away from Ayurveda and Unani because, oh, that is such old school thing, and we don't want to take, we don't want to go to Hakims basically. We want to go to doctor, which is essentially the same thing, but we don't want to go to Hakim. How would you draw a line? How would you bring comparison there?
Yeah, so I completely want to agree with and sort of see the same thing that Ms. Shankar had said about modern medicine. I've been working with modern medicine for many, many years now, for 25, 30 years. The point is that, as she correctly said, this modern medicine only came in around the 1900s, and it's not the only good thing about this medicine was the SOPs, protocols, the documentation, the research was slightly more organized, so therefore it was accepted more. And the human mind, sort of accepts things which are written down and organized much better than things which sound a little vague to it. So, and then modern medicine was propagated for many, many reasons. One of them was the fact that it made a lot of more business sense to propagate modern medicine. However, the fact is that if you read about medicine and about how modern medicine eventually was accepted initially in America and then across the world, was that they actually came up with measures to to sort of not accept people who had not done MBBS as doctors, which is a very recent thing, because doctor, the word itself, did not need an MBBS degree. You could be a practitioner of health using any form of, integrative medical practice, the Unani, the naturopathy, the Ayurveda, Chinese, Tibetan medicine, and you would still be a doctor. But then at a certain time, they brought in the regulation saying that until you're an MBBS person doing a sort of a degree from a certain recognized medical college, you do not call yourself a doctor. And that is where, things really changed, because then, people wanted to go to people who had the degree of the doctor, which was recognized across the world. But sadly, what is perceived and what is told to us may not always be the correct thing, because that's something that we are told because there's a certain set of people who want us to know that. So as Ms. Shankar also said that, it's not really eating turmeric for 20 days and, in very high doses and thinking of, becoming a person who will not have a viral infection or any other form of, antigen or pathogen affecting them. It is, as she said, a constant usage of these throughout lifestyle in a particular way, with a harmoniously working body that will have the medicinal effect. We use a word called hormesis in medicine, which is when everything is in harmony with each other. It's very holistic, it's integrated. And also, as she pointed out, modern medicine is looking at systems, organ systems. You take a certain cardiovascular system or an excretory system and you treat that. Whereas that, again, is not really the best thing to do, because the human body does not work in systems. It works as a single unit where everything is interacting with each other. So the bit about spices is that two things definitely we can, for sure understand. One, the fact that we're looking at using spices more in cooking and on a regular basis, and in various ways, and various types of spices that are available locally and are part of our ethnic culture. And the second is that when I spoke about using high potency spices in treatment, that is when we're talking about specific conditions, let's say a cancer or an autoimmune condition, where we are only using it for its medicinal value. And because we want the medicinal value to be potent at that particular time, we look at very high potency or very high. That's obviously not how you use it in regular life. Coming back to the kadha, as you said, kadha, I was doing with Assocha, we were doing a very big survey with the Indian police, and the Ministry of Ayush had done a very large research work during the first wave of COVID with the Indian police and the frontliners who were actually working when we were all locked in our houses, and they had to go out and work because they were the first frontline workers. And the Ayush has documented enough proof that people who were consuming kadha on a regular basis did not get the infection and got much little or much lesser of the infection. I'm specifically talking about COVID now. So therefore, yes, there is a direct correlation. How this happens or how this medicinally works is by various pathways. One is, of course, the fact that drinking hot things per se is something that can, the temperature of the body, we know that viruses and fungi and bacteria multiply in hot, humid conditions. But if the temperatures are really high, they die off. If the humidity is very low, they die off. So that is one part of it. Then, of course, these things that we used to make the kadha, which is from peppers to a lot of these mulethi, and we were using tulsi and amla and adrak and so many things that we otherwise also use, was that we know that they have antiviral properties. We know that they have, for example, allicin in garlic is antiviral. It's a very strong antiviral substance. So that is what we were exploiting in the kadha. And going forward also, I mean, having hot drinks like these, is always a good idea, not only when you're infected, but also when there is flu around you and you don't want to catch the flu. So there's a lot of logic to it, and there's a lot of research, thankfully, also to support it. Although, what happens with modern medicine again is we want to research and document everything and make a scientific sort of a thing saying that, listen, this is a paper, this proves that this fact, it's not an assumption and it's actually a fact. So that is what the word believes in. But as you correctly said, Saddaf, the spices that we use at our home have so many medicinal properties. And if we could regularly use them in the pure form, in various ways of culinary cooking, we're really doing a great job for our health.
Yeah. So because you ended with usage of spices in different ways in our kitchen as well. Then that sort of brings me to Shylashri again, is sort of, if we divide the north, east, south, west, all of us have a different pattern or different ways of using spices. I am one such North Indian who loves South Indian food because I think North Indians use a lot of spices. Even though as a chef, I also put a lot of spices in my food, but that is when I'm serving to people. When I'm eating, I'm not adding so much of spices, because I think when it comes to South, they use spices only so much. Of course, it's a generic statement, and I'm saying South as total and North in total. Very stereotypical, if I can add. But why is that? Why there's a different pattern or different kind of usage, and not just that, also communities. So as a Muslim, the kinds of spices that I am using be very different than somebody who is non-Muslim. Again, a very generic and stereotypical question, but yes.
Well, yeah. So I actually would move away from the generic because I'm from the South, but I've lived in the North. And what I actually found was, just doing the research in the anthropological space about how people actually use these spices and why is there a difference. There isn't a difference, for instance, between, so I looked at the North and the South in terms of just cooking the lady's finger, okra, bhindi. And what you find is that in the North, you have, I looked at some of the recipes, tarla dalal and all, and you have a whole bunch of spices. But what happens is the way it's cooked, you begin with the spices, then you put in the bhindi, and then you mix everything together and you let it cook, and then you put in, say, tamarind or something, just so that the bhindi's, the yucky thing doesn't spread, and it sort of remains separate. In the South, you cook it differently. You cook the vegetables separately. You cook and you don't put that many spices. You literally put, say, a mirchi powder and salt, but you cook the bhindi separately, and you cook it with tamarind so that the yucky thing goes away separately, and then you mix these. So you have this thing called curry powder. So the curry powder is basically roasted coriander, red chili, and there's a couple of other things, and they sort of ground into a powder. And then because it's already roasted and cooked, it's put right at the end, and it's just stroked a little bit, and then you eat it. And my thing was that, I just came up with the theory, but it's just my own theory. I sort of went through all kinds of research, and I finally came up with this theory that in the North, you have a whole bunch of invasions. And so you have a layering of cuisines, and you have a layering of cultures that come in. So you have, you have the Mughals, you have the British, you have a whole bunch of, and even earlier, you have a whole bunch of invaders coming in. But in the South, it's a much more insular space. So what you find is that the different castes cook differently. So in the South, you would say that a non-Brahmin or somebody from the Malabar area, though they would cook differently from the Brahmins who cook in, who sort of completely separate all of these and then mix them at the end. Whereas the Malabar area would cook it a little bit more like, say, in the North, because again, there they were used to sort of people coming in from the sea. And so you had not necessarily invasions, but you had much more of a mixing of cultures. And so I sort of put it down to how history treated these regions. And that's essentially why you have a layering of cuisines or a layering method of cooking as compared to this insular method of cooking. But that's just my own theory, and it completely, it's fine if you disagree with it totally. So, yeah. And
that's interesting.
yeah.
Though that is interesting because I mean that's another way of using spices in our food that I have also noticed. However, I think most of the North houses we do cook the spices earlier so that it just releases all these sort of essential oils and the aroma and the spices, everything in the food, and then just you cook it so that you don't get that kachapan or the danedar texture. Now, as a chef, of course, in the restaurant or when we are cooking food, there's of course, I would say reason, but when people started cooking, there was of course reason, but now we just do it because that's how we have seen people doing it. For example, making onion paste or using onion right in the beginning, or using ginger garlic right in the beginning, or throwing in the badi ilaichi and the tezpatta if you're making some non-veg food right in the beginning. And why not towards the end? And for example, if you're making a kolma, you will add multiple types of onion, a paste, and the caramelized or the fried onion. Now, of course, for a chef, I think I would say that the reason of adding onion paste earlier is so that your water evaporates and the rawness goes away as compared to towards the end when you do the same thing with ginger garlic as well. Now, but that's a chef's reasoning. But I think I would ask Manjari as well that according to you, what would be a right way of using the spices in the food? And as Shylashri was mentioning, right, towards the end or in the beginning, is it just the way of cooking? It doesn't really matter, or actually it does. That for example, turmeric is oil soluble, so you need to sort of you put in oil first. However, on the contrary, I know people and many from South as well, they do add towards the end so that it still touches the fat, but the right amount of turmeric. So what would be a good way of cooking, Manjari?
Sorry, can I just quickly just make one correction here? Because when I say when they use these spices at the end, there are just 2 or 3 spices, and it's already being roasted, right? And it's only one set of people, one caste. I'm talking about the Brahmins here. But if you take, say, other castes, they would do it differently. So, if you're using onions and garlic, it goes in first. It doesn't go in at the end, right? And even chilies, I'd be curious to know, is there a difference between using red chili powder, which has to be soluble in oil, and then you take full red chilies and you powder them. First you roast them and then again in oil, but then you powder them after that. So is there a difference in terms of the impact it makes on the body? I mean, I'm adding my own question to yours, sorry, but yeah.
So sadly, I'd admit to start with, as I try to answer this question, is that this is not taught in our colleges in our nutrition. I wish it was, and I wish it was more about our food that was taught to us. What is taught is essentially very clinical in nature, and clinical, when I say, is modern medicine, and anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. That's what we are studying all the time, and practicing also. But to answer your question, certain things we do know about spices. For example, as you mentioned, that curcumin or turmeric is fat soluble, so it's better to use it with fat. So that's why in our typical curries we use fat to do the tadka, wherein then we add so first the fat goes into the pan, and then you add the red chili, you add the turmeric, you add the cumin, and that's when you add the vegetable or whatever you're making a curry out of. So fat is one of the things that definitely makes the spices more bioavailable. That's one. Second is that the spices also work in combination with each other. We know that, for example, black pepper and turmeric work together. Curcumin is better absorbed as per research when you combine it with piperine, which comes from black pepper. So that is another one. Garlic and ginger, for example, work best if they are not cooked too much. The more raw they are, the more they have these alkaloids, they have these substances which are quite heat labile, if I could say. So heating them too much is not a good idea. So you try and eat a lot of raw garlic and raw. That's why you see a lot of our bhartas and things have a lot of raw, ginger added to it. We also just crush the ginger and add it to our tea, instead of just only cooking it. The garlic also, the way we make our chutneys and dips at home, it's just either roasted or just raw garlic. So these are the things that we know. Also, for other spices such as cinnamon, fenugreek, carom seeds, asafoetida, all the other ones, we know that some of them work with water. For example, carom seeds or ajwain works with warm water very well. And it is carminative. It's shown to reduce flatulence, bloating. It's known to work on the GI, on the gut. So different spices are, and they have traditionally been used like it. So if you go back, if you sort of connect the dots between how a spice effectively works for human health and how it has culturally been used, you'll find that all the dots are really joining. So there is a little bit of technicality to it. As I said, I wouldn't know everything because we were not taught this in our medicine, and I wish we were. But going forward, it will become a conversation. It will also become part of syllabi. It will also become part of modern medicine, because till now, modern medicine was trying to keep itself aloof from natural or traditional medicine, but it's not going to be like the same. It's all going to be interwoven, and we are going to pick up all the good facets of different medicinal things and put them together. So as I think learn about spices more and more as we become more and more civilized. Obviously, thanks to the pandemic, there's no going back now. The spices will stay for sure in our lives.
Yeah, that also brings me into a thing that I don't know whether they are fad or not. But every morning when we get up, we are asked to have lemon water or zira water or things of that same family, or just soaking zira, mustard seed, and a bunch of other spices at night so you can drink in the morning. Does that really work? Because there's so much questions around that.
I think it does, because many reasons why it can work. One is that, for example, fenugreek, which we call methi seeds, is known to be an oral hypoglycemic substance. So if you have it first thing in the morning on empty stomach, you can change the behavior of insulin in a specific way. So it does work. Similarly, carom seeds or ajwain, as we know that, when you have them soaked overnight and in water, they are infused in the water. And when you drink that water, you can heal the gut to some extent, especially for people who have, some sort of reflux or ulceration or bloating and that category of GI discomfort. Then, of course, as you said, the nimbu pani. So lime, we know, is one of the richest. Citrus fruits are very good sources of potassium. And a lot of us have too much of sodium in our body thanks to using table salt and processed food, which has a lot of salt component to it. So having nimbu pani first thing in the morning and throughout the day allows that sodium potassium balance to get, because it's a very physical balance. It's essentially two electrolytes that are working with each other via the kidneys. So that sort of puts it in place. So nimbu pani, always is advised, especially for people who have any form of metabolic disease or disorder. And people talk about alkaline water, infused water, using herbs and spices and mint. So all of them do have a good impact. There is no doubting that. How much they can help is a little bit of a question. So yeah, but they definitely help for sure.
I think it goes back to the same thing. Nothing is just a quick fix. It has to be sustained. Before I go to my last segment, I would first ask Shylashri, because again, basis the research that you must have done regarding the book that you wrote, we have two folklores, well, not folklores, a very gharelu upchar or jugaad that I am aware of. One, chili, where you burn the chilies, जो भी नजर लगती है वो उतर जाता है. So that's the first thing I know. Second thing is also when you do taweez, right? So when you make taweez and when you don't wear it, you just put it in the water and then drink it, or as they call it, dam lagana, which is dua, and in the water that we drink every morning, depending on what problem you have, that all these things will happen. Now that dua is written in saffron water, right? So that these are the two things that I am aware of, which comes from different sort of community. But have you come across any such stuff where you are burning or doing something with the spice apart from the nimbu mirchi? Apart from that, is there
Yeah,
anything
I
else?
mean, they burn camphor, no? In the south, you burn camphor to remove the evil eye. So, and then it's the same camphor that is used for the gods. And camphor is supposed to sort of remove all the bad energies. So that's one thing I'm aware of. And in this mirchi thing, I'm curious because mirchi came only in the 16th century. So presumably this is from the 16th century onwards, they've been burning the mirchi, presumably, right?
Not maybe a little longer than that, because we also had to dry it up, right? It's not the fresh one, it's the dried mirchi that you're burning. Waited
So
a
it's
little
still
bit to
relatively, yeah. I mean, there's this whole
relatively
there's a whole section in my book, an essay on traditions. You know, how do traditions sort of come about? And one of the things that comes, I always thought coffee was a very age-old tradition in the South, and it turns out it was only adopted in the mid 19th century, which is not very long ago. Sorry, mid 20th century. Not 19th century, it's early to mid 20th century. So it's not even like 80 years ago, maybe, or 80, 90 years ago. So, so it's just interesting that, I mean, even with spices, a lot of the spices that we have now were not with us earlier. So only, and which is why it's interesting that Dr. Manjari mentioned the relationship between pepper, black pepper, and turmeric, because these two were found in the Harappan civilizations cooking bowls in Farmana, in Haryana, where they've excavated. And these were found in their cooking bowls. The starches were found from then. And so they've been cooking with this right from then, which is really interesting because we don't know very much about the Harappan civilization, but we do know that, and we haven't been able to decipher their script. So we don't know what's been happening, what actually, how evolved they were, but they seem to have built cities, and they seem to have done, they seem to have been a proper sort of city-based civilization, but we know very little about them. And so it's interesting that they knew about this relationship then, and we continued it almost like a folklore all these years, and we still cook like that today. So I mean, so some traditions go way back, and then there are others which are of a more recent vintage, like coffee, or even burning the chilies goes back a little bit earlier. But the notion of the evil eye has always been around, so you just use different types of things. So for instance, in the 15th and the 16th centuries in Europe, they used to use, these spices, or they used to sort of sprinkle them on the ground to sort of purify them, purify the space. And they also used spices to remove the bacteria, or if their food was always spoiled. So in order for the bacteria not to take any effect inside their bodies, they used to use spices. So, which is why the spice trade was so important, and which is why, Vasco da Gama shows up here in 1498 looking for spices. And, then the Portuguese sort of have a monopoly over spices for about 2 centuries. So a lot of the wars were fought around spices. And it's because of their medicinal properties at that time too, because it was very, very important. So yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, those are also very interesting questions, I think, for people to explore in terms of the relationship. How do, like, now we have modern science, and we sort of say, oh, we know, we have all these instruments to figure out the relationships between different food items and different elements. But at that time, they didn't have those instruments, and yet they knew the relationship. So it's an interesting question, I think, for us.
Yeah, that's why I think that science sort of has passed test of time. Now, last two, and I think one word answers before we wrap up the session. One, of course, because I am chef, so I need to ask this as well. Manjari, your favorite two spices if you have to pick, and if you have to cook or stay with those spices, apart from salt, I give you salt. What else is your favorite?
Cinnamon is the star to start with, and I think turmeric would be the second one.
Oh, wow. But turmeric will need black pepper. I'll give you black peppers. Well,
I'm
shall
going to
she?
be very boring because
No,
I
I'm going to
actually
change the
like.
question.
Okay, okay.
I'm not going to ask that question.
No, I agree with Dr. Manjari. I would pick those, the very
Oh.
same. So.
Oh, wow. Cinnamon is nice. I mean, yeah, we can make
It's too
cinnamon latte.
sweet.
And
No, it's too sweet. Don't like it.
oh, you don't like cinnamon?
I don't like cinnamon.
Oh, okay. So there we go. All the cinnamon for you. If I can talk about India only, which are the two countries? Well, not countries. Which are the two states you would pick who knows the best ways of using spices in the dishes? In the dishes.
I would pick Deccan, the Deccan, and there I would pick both the Hindu and the Muslim in the
Sure.
Deccan. Both cuisines because they're not that different, they're quite
Yeah.
similar. And I would also pick so I would pick, say, I would pick the Malabar coast. Again, I think, and Chettinad food. I like, those have very interesting ways of using. And UP. Oh, you asked me only to pick two, but UP too.
Cool.
Sorry. UP, Avanti food, superb. So yeah.
So clearly, you are on the spicier note because you picked up Deccan, you picked up Malabar, and also to a large extent Awadh, which is spicier. You left Delhi, and Manjari, of course, you like the spice. I think the sweet and little subtle.
I just got two options. Otherwise, I would not have left the chilies.
Yeah, I mean, without chilies, तो हम ऐसे बड़े नहीं हो पाएंगे ना. Awesome. That was really lovely to interact both of you because just
likewise.
I think you can not really so you can keep on talking about turmeric or about cinnamon or about star anise or about spice box in general, but the conversation will never end. Time will, which exactly has happened right now. So on that note, thank you, Manjari, thank you, Shylashri, and thank you everybody who are listening. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.